The waiter's hands trembled as the glass slipped and shattered at Princess Diana's feet. He froze, heart racing, bracing for anger, for dismissal, for shame. Instead, Diana slowly knelt, her gown touching the floor, and gently steadied his shaking wrist. The room fell silent. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but it held everything together. The young man broke down, tears spilling freely before royalty and strangers alike. No one understood why she stayed there, nor how this small moment would quietly follow him for life. Quick question: where are you watching from today? Let us know your city or country in the comments. The ballroom glowed with soft gold light, chandeliers hanging like frozen stars above long white tables. Crystal glasses chimed gently as guests shifted in their seats. Silk brushing, silk, polite laughter floating through the air. Everything looked flawless from a distance, the kind of evening designed to impress. Princess Diana moved through the room with practiced grace. She smiled, greeted donors, listened attentively to words she had heard many times before. Yet her eyes never lingered where she was expected to look. They drifted instead, quietly observant, absorbing details others missed. At the far edge of the room, a young waiter stood near the service table. His uniform was neat, carefully pressed, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled slightly as he gripped the tray, fingers tight, knuckles pale. He swallowed hard, glanced toward the head waiter, then back at the guests. His breath was shallow, measured, as if any mistake might expose him. Diana noticed him immediately. She saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he held himself smaller than necessary, the stillness of someone trying not to draw attention, trying not to exist. She had seen that posture before, many times. In hospitals, in shelters, in people who had learned that being invisible felt safer than being seen. A speech began near the center of the room. Polite applause followed, echoing briefly before fading into murmurs. Diana clapped softly, her gaze drifting once more to the edge of the room. The waiter stepped forward, moving carefully between tables, every step deliberate. A guest shifted suddenly in their chair. The tray tilted, just a little. For a split second, time seemed to hesitate. Then the sound cut through the room, sharp and final. Crystal shattered against the marble floor, scattering at Princess Diana's feet. The ballroom inhaled as one. Conversation died instantly. Chairs stilled. A few gasps slipped out before people could stop themselves. Someone let out a short, nervous laugh. Another guest frowned in irritation, already signaling for assistance. The waiter froze. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, the words tumbling over each other. His hands hovered helplessly in the air, unsure whether to clean, to bow, or to disappear altogether. Slowly, fearfully, his eyes lifted toward Diana. He waited for anger, for embarrassment, for dismissal. Diana did not move at first. She looked down at the broken glass, then back at him. Not sharply, not coldly, just fully, as if, for that moment, nothing else in the room existed. The head waiter began striding toward them, his expression tight and rehearsed. "I'll take care of this," he said quickly, already reaching for the young man's arm. Diana raised her hand. It was a small gesture, gentle, but it stopped everything. The head waiter froze. Guests leaned forward in their seats, curiosity tightening the silence. Diana slowly pushed her chair back. The faint scrape echoed louder than it should have. She stood. Her expression remained calm, but something deeper moved behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. She stepped closer to the young waiter, her gown brushing the floor, her attention fixed entirely on him. The young man's breath shook. His eyes glistened as he stood amid broken glass and unspoken judgment. And Princess Diana was already lowering herself toward him. No one understood why she knelt beside him, but in that moment, Diana saw something the room had completely missed. The silence didn't break, it sharpened. Every eye in the ballroom stayed fixed on the young waiter as if he had shattered more than glass. He stood frozen, shoulders rigid, breath caught halfway in his chest. The broken crystal at Diana's feet seemed louder now, glittering like evidence of a crime. "I'll clean this up immediately," the head waiter said again, his voice firmer this time. His hand closed around the young man's arm, not gently. "Step away. You're causing a disturbance." The grip made the waiter flinch. "I said I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. His face burned as he felt the room watching, measuring him. He tried to bend down for the shards, but the head waiter pulled him upright, sharp and impatient. "Leave it," he snapped. "You've done enough." A low murmur rippled through the guests. Some shook their heads, others looked away, relieved it wasn't them. One man sighed loudly, checking his watch. A woman near the front leaned toward her companion and muttered, "Unbelievable," as if the evening itself had been insulted. The waiter's eyes dropped to the floor, Princess Diana watched it all. She saw how the young man's shoulders curled inward, how his hands trembled harder now, empty and useless at his sides. She saw the familiar rhythm of humiliation, the way it arrived quietly, then settled heavily, pressing down until a person felt smaller than the space they occupied. The head waiter straightened his jacket and forced a polite smile toward the guests. "Our apologies," he announced. "We'll have this handled right away." Handled. The word landed hard. Two staff members hurried forward with cloths and a small broom, carefully avoiding the waiter's gaze. No one asked if he was all right. No one spoke to him at all. He was already being erased. "Sir," the head waiter said under his breath, leaning closer to the young man. "Go to the back, now." The waiter swallowed. His lips parted, as if he wanted to explain something about nerves, about needing the job, about how today wasn't a good day, but nothing came out. He nodded once, obedient, ashamed. That was when Diana took another step forward. "Wait," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The head waiter turned, startled. "Your Royal Highness, please." "He hasn't finished," Diana said gently. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few guests exchanged glances, curiosity edging into discomfort. This was not how things were meant to go. Accidents were to be corrected quickly, quietly, without feeling. The head waiter hesitated, his authority wavering. "He spilled a glass," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "We'll replace it." Diana looked at the broken crystal again. Then she looked at the waiter. "No," she said softly. He dropped a glass. The difference was subtle, but devastating. The waiter's breath caught. He looked up at her, eyes wide, confused. No one had separated the mistake from the man before. No one had made space for that distinction. Diana turned slightly, her gaze lifting to the room. "We've all dropped something at some point," she said. "Some of us just do it where everyone can see." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The murmurs stopped. The head waiter opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The power in the room was no longer sitting where he expected it to. The young waiter felt his chest tighten. Not with fear this time, but with something unfamiliar. Relief, perhaps, or disbelief. Still, he remained standing among the remnants of his mistake, waiting for the final word that would send him away. Princess Diana didn't give it. Instead, she turned fully toward him and asked a question no one else had thought to ask. "What's wrong?" Diana said quietly, and the answer was written all over his trembling face. The waiter didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, pressing against his chest. Princess Diana stood just inches away now. Not above him, not distant. Close enough that he could hear her breathing. Slow, steady, calm. I didn't mean to," he said finally. His voice cracked on the last word. "I was being careful." "I know," Diana replied softly. The simplicity of her response stunned him. No lecture, no warning, no disappointment, just belief. Behind them, the head waiter shifted uneasily. "Your Royal Highness," he said, lowering his voice. "We really should move this along." The schedule. Diana didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the young man. "Take a breath," she said, slowly. He hesitated, then obeyed. His chest rose, fell, uneven at first, then steadier. The room waited, restless, confused by the pause. This was supposed to be quick, clean, forgettable. Diana made it none of those things. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The question hit him harder than the humiliation had. My name," he repeated, stunned. "Yes," she said, a small encouraging smile touching her lips. "Daniel," he said. "It's Daniel." The name settled between them, real and grounding. "Daniel," Diana repeated, carefully, as if it mattered. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head quickly. "No, just embarrassed." A faint murmur rippled through the guests. Some leaned forward now, curiosity overtaking irritation. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look. The head waiter cleared his throat. "He can be replaced for the remainder of the evening," he said, trying to regain control. "We'll assign someone else." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "Replaced." The word echoed loudly inside him. Diana finally turned. "No," she said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, but it landed. "He made a mistake," she continued. "That doesn't make him disposable." The head waiter blinked. "Of course not, ma'am, but nothing," Diana said calmly. "He's staying." A hush fell over the room. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at her, eyes wide, as if afraid this was temporary, as if one wrong move might undo it all. Diana noticed. She lowered herself slightly, bringing her face closer to his level. "You're doing fine," she said. "One broken glass doesn't erase who you are." Something in Daniel's face collapsed. Tears welled up suddenly, unstoppable. He turned his head, ashamed, lifting a hand to hide them. But Diana gently shook her head. "It's all right," she said. "You don't have to disappear." That was it. The words broke through years of swallowed fear, pressure, and quiet endurance. Daniel's shoulders began to shake as tears spilled freely. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. The room didn't know where to look anymore. Princess Diana stayed exactly where she was. She didn't rush him. She didn't apologize for him. She didn't step away. She simply stayed. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not just for Daniel, but for everyone watching. As Daniel struggled to steady himself, Diana did something that left the entire ballroom stunned into silence. Diana did not move away when Daniel began to cry. That alone unsettled the room. Most people shifted when emotions spilled like that. They gave space. They looked elsewhere. Diana did neither. She stayed exactly where she was, her presence steady, unhurried, as if tears were not an inconvenience but a language she understood well. Daniel tried to wipe his face with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, the words automatic now. "I don't usually, I just—" "Daniel," Diana said softly. He stopped. "Don't apologize for being human." The sentence landed quietly, but it cut through the room more sharply than any raised voice ever could. A few guests inhaled without realizing it. Someone near the back lowered their glass, suddenly aware of how loud it sounded. Daniel nodded, but his chest still shook. He hadn't cried like this in front of anyone for years. Not since the hospital corridors. Not since the phone call that came too late. He tried to swallow it down, the way he always did. Diana saw that too. She glanced briefly at the broken glass on the floor, then back at him. Carefully, deliberately, she lowered herself further, until she was kneeling. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A princess did not kneel. Not here. Not like this. The head waiter stiffened. "Your Royal Highness." Diana lifted her hand again. This time her gaze never left Daniel. "You're not alone right now," she said to him, her voice low enough that it felt meant only for his ears. "Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to hold it by yourself." Daniel's breath hitched. "I lost my mum," he said suddenly. The words slipped out before he could stop them. They fell into the space between them, raw and unprotected. A few guests nearby froze, caught mid-movement. "It was 6 months ago," he continued, voice trembling. "She used to work nights too. She said I'd be fine. That I just had to keep going." Diana's expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to most, but something softened. Something deepened. Recognition passed through her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Not I understand. Not time heals. Just sorrow. Honest and present." Daniel nodded, tears spilling again. "I needed this job," he admitted. "I still do." Diana reached out, not to wipe his tears, not to fix anything, but to steady his shaking hands. Her touch was light, respectful. "You are allowed to need things," she said, "and you are allowed to hurt." The room felt smaller now, closer, uncomfortably intimate. The head waiter cleared his throat, uncertainty creeping into his posture. This scene was slipping beyond control. Donors were watching, schedules were breaking. Diana finally looked up. Her gaze swept the room, not accusing, not angry, but searching, as if asking a question without words. Who decided dignity was optional? No one answered. She turned back to Daniel. "Stay with me for a moment," she said gently. "Just breathe." He did. Slowly the shaking eased. The tears softened. The room waited, caught between discomfort and awe. Then Diana began to rise. But before she did, she said something so quiet, so personal, that only Daniel heard it, and it changed the way he would remember this night forever. Before standing, Diana whispered something to Daniel. Words meant for him alone, carrying a truth he wasn't ready to understand yet. Diana rose slowly, the room still holding its breath. Daniel felt the change immediately. Not fear this time, but uncertainty. Her kneeling had protected him, wrapped him in a moment no one could interrupt. Standing meant the world was about to return. But Diana did not step away from him. She remained close, her presence steady at his side, as if distance itself might undo what had just happened. "Would you like some water?" she asked him gently. Daniel nodded, embarrassed by how much the simple question meant. Before anyone else could move, Diana reached for a glass from the table beside her. She checked it, carefully, then handed it to him herself. Not a command, not a signal to staff, a choice. Daniel's hands shook as he accepted it. "Thank you," he murmured. Across the room, tension gathered like a storm that had been waiting. A tall man near the center table pushed his chair back sharply. The sound cut through the hush. "This is becoming excessive," he said, loud enough to be heard. "We're here for a charity dinner, not a scene." Several heads turned. A few guests nodded in agreement. Others stiffened, suddenly aware of how fragile the moment was. The head waiter seized the opening. "Sir, if you'll allow us," he said quickly, "we'll escort him out and resume." "No," Diana said. "Just one word." She turned toward the man who had spoken. Her expression remained calm, but something in her posture shifted, quiet strength replacing gentleness. "This is a charity dinner," she said, "and this is a human being." The man frowned. "With respect, Your Royal Highness, mistakes happen, but professionalism matters." Diana met his gaze without blinking. "So does compassion." A ripple moved through the room. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest looked down at their plate, suddenly uncomfortable with the weight of their silence. Daniel stared at the floor, wishing he could disappear again. The attention felt heavy, dangerous. He took a step back instinctively. Diana noticed immediately. She angled her body slightly, placing herself between him and the room. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. A shield made of calm. "He's staying," she said, "and he will finish his shift." The head waiter hesitated. "Your Royal Highness, that isn't standard procedure." Diana nodded. "Then perhaps it's time to reconsider the procedure." The words landed harder than expected. The man who had complained scoffed quietly, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." Diana turned to him once more. "If this moment makes you uncomfortable," she said, her voice steady, "you're free to leave." A stunned silence followed. No one had expected that. The man flushed, realizing too late how many eyes were now on him. After a beat, he sat back down without another word. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not relief, something stronger. Worth. The head waiter swallowed, his authority unraveling. "Of course," he said stiffly. "We'll continue." Diana finally turned back to Daniel. "Are you all right to keep going?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think so. I know you are," she said softly. As Daniel stepped away to collect himself, the room slowly resumed its movement. Glasses lifted, whispers returned, but nothing felt the same, because the rules had been spoken aloud. And someone powerful in the room had not liked it at all. From across the ballroom, a donor with real influence stood up, his expression promising that this was far from over. The man who stood was not loud. He didn't need to be. His tailored jacket, his calm movements, the way others subtly shifted to make space for him. Everything about him carried weight. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Even the head waiter straightened instinctively. "I believe we've lost focus," the donor said evenly. "This event has commitments, schedules, expectations." His eyes moved briefly to Daniel. Not unkind, not angry, dismissive. Daniel felt the familiar drop in his stomach. This was the moment, he thought. This was where kindness ended and reality resumed. He lowered his gaze, bracing for the quiet removal that always followed discomfort. Princess Diana did not look away. She listened. Fully. Then she nodded once, as if acknowledging something important. "You're right," she said. A ripple passed through the room. The head waiter exhaled in relief. Daniel's shoulders sank. Then Diana continued. "We do have commitments," she said calmly. "To dignity, to care, to the very reason we're here tonight." The donor's brow tightened slightly. "Of course," he replied. "But scenes like this are exactly why these rooms exist," Diana said gently. "They remind us who we're meant to serve." Silence returned, heavier now. The donor studied her. He had expected resistance, perhaps emotion. He had not expected certainty delivered without aggression. Daniel dared to look up. Diana's posture hadn't changed. Her voice hadn't risen. But something unmistakable stood behind her words. A line she would not step back from. "I respect your generosity," she added. "But generosity without humanity is just a transaction." That did it, because everyone had seen it. Power had pressed forward, and kindness had not moved. Diana returned to her seat, smoothing her gown, her expression composed. To anyone watching casually, the moment might have looked finished. It wasn't, because as Daniel reached the service corridor, the head waiter leaned in and said something under his breath. Something meant to put him back in his place. Daniel froze, and from across the room Diana noticed. Just when Daniel thought it was over, a quiet threat followed him into the shadows, and Diana saw it happen. Have you ever seen kindness hold its ground when power tried to push it away? Daniel stopped just inside the service corridor. The hallway was dimmer, quieter, lined with steel carts and half-open doors. The warmth of the ballroom felt far away now, like something he had imagined. His pulse thudded in his ears as the head waiter leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't misunderstand what just happened," the man murmured. "Finish your shift, then we'll talk." Daniel knew that tone. It meant later. It meant consequences. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied automatically. But his hands didn't stop shaking. Behind him, the dinner resumed, cutlery clinking, laughter cautiously returning. But Daniel felt the old weight settle back onto his shoulders. Kindness, he told himself, had limits. It always did. Daniel. He turned. Princess Diana stood at the entrance to the corridor, not flanked by staff, not surrounded by attention, just her. The head waiter stiffened instantly. "Your Royal Highness, I was just—" "I know," Diana said calmly. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Daniel. "Are you all right?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. The safe answer rose to his lips. Yes. Always yes. But something had changed. Then quietly, "I just don't want to cause trouble." Diana tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Did you cause trouble?" she asked. "No," he said, surprising himself with how quickly the word came out. She nodded. "Then you're not responsible for how others respond to their discomfort." The head waiter cleared his throat. "With respect, Your Royal Highness, staff matters are about people," Diana finished. She turned to face him fully now. "And I'm speaking to one." The corridor felt smaller, the air tighter. Diana looked back at Daniel. "You don't have to shrink to make others comfortable," she said gently. "Not tonight. Not ever." The words settled slowly, like something fragile finding a place to land. Daniel swallowed. "Thank you," he said. "First, I see you," she replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked, "Will you tell me something?" Daniel nodded. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Right now." The question stunned him. Not what should you do. Not what are you allowed to do. What do you want? "I want to finish my shift," he said after a moment. "Properly." Diana's smile deepened. "Then go," she said. "I'll be right here." Daniel straightened. For the first time that evening, he walked back into the ballroom without watching the floor. His steps were still careful, but they were his. Guests noticed. A few met his eyes and looked away. Others nodded, small and unsure. The head waiter said nothing. Diana returned to her seat, her posture composed, her presence unchanged. Yet something invisible had shifted. Daniel wasn't just surviving the night anymore. He was choosing it. And that choice unsettled more people than the broken glass ever had. As Daniel resumed service, he didn't see the look exchanged across the room. One that suggested the night still had teeth. Have you ever had a moment where someone helped you find your voice, just when you thought you didn't have one? The room looked normal again. That was the strangest part. Plates were being cleared, glasses refilled, soft music returned, careful not to draw attention. To anyone arriving late, it would have seemed like an elegant evening unfolding exactly as planned. But Daniel felt it. Every step he took carried weight now, not fear awareness. He moved between tables with steadier hands, his back straighter, his eyes lifted just enough to meet the room without apology. Some guests avoided looking at him, others watched him closely. A few smiled, uncertain but sincere. Princess Diana noticed all of it. She followed Daniel's movement not as a supervisor, not as a protector, but as someone quietly witnessing growth. Each time he passed her table, their eyes met for the briefest moment. No words, just recognition. Then, as Daniel reached her side to collect a plate, Diana spoke again. Not loudly, not publicly. "Daniel," she said. He paused. "Yes, ma'am?" She gestured slightly toward an empty space beside her table, away from the center of attention. "Walk with me for a moment." His heart skipped. He glanced toward the head waiter, who looked away, suddenly interested in nothing at all. Daniel followed. They stopped near a tall window overlooking the darkened street below. Rain traced thin lines down the glass, blurring the city lights into something softer, kinder. "You handled yourself well," Diana said. "Because of you," Daniel replied honestly. She shook her head gently. "Because of you." The words unsettled him more than praise ever had. Diana rested her hands lightly in front of her. For a moment she seemed to be choosing something, measuring not the room but herself. "When I was younger," she said quietly, "I spent a long time believing I had to earn kindness, that I had to perform it perfectly." Daniel listened, unsure where to look. "I learned," she continued, "that dignity isn't something others grant us. It's something we carry, even when the world tries to take it." The sentence hung between them. Daniel felt it land somewhere deep, somewhere he hadn't known was still open. "I don't always remember that," she added, a softness entering her voice. "But tonight reminded me," he swallowed. "My were cold Rizuremka." Diana met his eyes. "What does remember it?" he said. Then she smiled. Small, warm, unmistakably human. "Go on," she said. "Finish your work." Daniel nodded and stepped away, but something had changed permanently. He didn't realize it yet, but that sentence about dignity, about carrying it, would follow him long after the lights dimmed and the tables were cleared. It would return in moments far from this room, in moments when no princess stood nearby. As the evening drew toward its close, conversations slowly loosened. Guests prepared to leave. The tension that had once threatened to fracture the room settled into something reflective, almost reverent. Diana returned to her seat, gazing briefly out the window before turning back to the table. No one knew what she had said to the waiter. They would never know. But Daniel did, and years later, when life tested him in ways far harsher than a broken glass, that quiet sentence would rise again, steady, unshakable. Long after this night ended, Daniel would realize that what Diana gave him wasn't protection. It was something far more enduring. Time moved forward. It always did. The night ended the way nights like that usually did, with coats collected, goodbyes exchanged, cars pulling away into the London dark. The ballroom emptied, the music faded, staff stacked chairs and wiped tables until the room returned to quiet anonymity. But Daniel carried something out with him that no one could see. Weeks passed, then months. Life pressed in again. Early mornings, long shifts, bills that never waited. The memory of that evening didn't fade, but it changed. It stopped feeling unreal. It settled into him, steady and present, like a hand at his back. Whenever his confidence wavered, he remembered her voice. Dignity isn't granted, it's carried. He repeated it silently during hard shifts, during moments when customers snapped, during nights when exhaustion threatened to shrink him back into old habits. Then one morning, everything stopped. The television in the staff break room flickered on as Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee. The room was half awake, muted conversations, chairs scraping, the hum of a tired day beginning. A headline appeared. The words didn't make sense at first. They slid past him, refusing to land. Then someone whispered, "No, no way." Daniel turned fully toward the screen. Princess Diana, gone. The room fell into a stunned quiet, heavier than any silence Daniel had known. A spoon slipped from someone's hand and clattered against the floor. No one bent to pick it up. Daniel felt the cup shaking in his grip. Images followed, flowers, crowds, tears that felt too large for the screen that held them. Voices spoke about tragedy, about loss, about a world in shock. Daniel didn't hear most of it. All he could see was a ballroom bathed in gold light, broken glass on marble, a woman kneeling when no one expected it. His chest tightened. He hadn't known her, not really. He understood that. And yet grief moved through him anyway, sharp and personal, as if someone who had once stood between him and the world had suddenly vanished. Daniel stepped outside. The air was cool, damp. The city carried on, unaware of how suddenly it had changed for him. He leaned against the brick wall and let the feeling come quiet, steady, undeniable. "She saw me," he whispered to no one. He remembered how she had stayed, how she had listened, how she had spoken as if dignity were not fragile, but permanent. Around the world, people mourned a princess. Daniel mourned a moment that had told him who he was allowed to be. He straightened slowly, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket. The words came back to him again, not as comfort this time, but as responsibility. Carry it. He went back inside and finished his shift. That night, Daniel began telling the story for the first time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. To a coworker, to a friend. Later to people who needed to hear it. And each time he spoke, he realized something unexpected. Her kindness hadn't ended with her. It was moving quietly, steadily through him. Years later, someone would finally ask Daniel why he never forgot that night, and his answer would stop them cold. Do you believe a single moment of kindness can outlive the person who offered it? The question came years later. It was asked quietly, without ceremony, in a place that had nothing to do with royalty or chandeliers or broken glass. Why do you always treat people like that? Someone asked Daniel one evening, watching him speak gently to a nervous young trainee. Even when no one's watching. Daniel paused. The restaurant was closing. Chairs were stacked. The air smelled faintly of soap and warm food. He dried his hands on a towel, then leaned back against the counter, considering the question as if it deserved the respect of an honest answer. Because someone once treated me like I mattered, he said. They waited. Daniel smiled. Not wide, not performative, just real. A long time ago. He didn't often tell the full story anymore. Not because it had lost meaning, but because it had grown too large to explain quickly. Still, that night, something opened. He spoke about the charity dinner, about the glass, about the silence that followed. He spoke about a woman who knelt when no one expected her to, and who listened when it would have been easier to move on. She didn't fix my life, he said. She didn't make promises. She just stayed. The trainee listened, wide-eyed. Daniel glanced toward the window, where the city lights blurred softly against the dark. That was Princess Diana, he added, quietly. The name settled into the room. Years had softened the sharpness of her loss, but not its weight. Flowers still appeared on anniversaries. Stories still surfaced. Some large, some almost unbelievably small. This was one of the small ones. Daniel had moved on since then. He'd taken classes, gained confidence, slowly worked his way into a position where he could choose the kind of environment he wanted to help create. He made space for mistakes. He spoke up when someone was treated as disposable. Not loudly, not dramatically, consistently. Sometimes when he saw fear in someone's eyes, he remembered his own reflection in the polished marble floor that night, and he remembered her voice. Carry it. The trainee broke the silence. Do you think she knew, they asked, what it meant to you? Daniel considered the question. I don't think she needed to, he said. She wasn't collecting proof. He folded the towel and placed it neatly on the counter. Kindness like that isn't about being remembered. It's about being repeated. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the glass in the same quiet rhythm Daniel remembered from that night long ago. He smiled to himself. Because in moments when the world still felt heavy, when power pressed down, when dignity felt fragile, he knew exactly what to do. He would kneel if he had to. He would stay. He would see. And in that way, Princess Diana never really left. Long after the applause faded, her greatest legacy lived on. Not in palaces, but in moments no one thought to notice. If you believe kindness should be carried forward, not just admired, share this story with someone who needs it today. Daniel learned something over the years. Some stories aren't meant to be told loudly. They aren't for stages or speeches or moments of attention. They live better in quiet spaces, in kitchens after long shifts, in late-night conversations, in pauses where honesty feels safer than performance. He told the story rarely now, but when he did, it was always the same. Never exaggerated, never polished, just true. He told it to a young colleague once, after she spilled an entire tray of drinks and stood frozen, waiting for anger. Daniel had stepped in before the manager could speak. It's all right, he'd said. Clean it up. You're still you. Later, when she asked why he'd defended her, Daniel had hesitated. Then, simply, he said, someone did that for me once. He told it to his nephew too, years later, when the boy came home from school quiet and folded in on himself. They sat at the kitchen table, homework untouched. Did you do something wrong? Daniel had asked. The boy shook his head. They made me feel small. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood that feeling well. So he told him about a night filled with gold light and silence. About broken glass. About a woman who knelt when no one else would. The boy listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, his nephew asked, why did she do that? Daniel smiled faintly. Because she saw someone who needed it. The boy thought about that for a long moment. Then he said, I want to be like her. Daniel felt something warm and heavy settle in his chest. That was how the story worked. It didn't demand attention. It didn't ask to be believed. It just passed quietly from one person to another, changing shape as it went. Less about Diana, more about what she had made possible. Even now, years later, Daniel could still picture her clearly. Not as she appeared on television screens or magazine covers, but as she was that night, kneeling, listening, unafraid of discomfort. When people spoke about her legacy, they often spoke in grand terms. Charities, causes, crowds. Daniel understood those mattered, but he also knew this: the truest measure of her impact couldn't be counted. It lived in moments no one filmed, in choices people made when power wasn't watching. He never placed himself at the center of the story. He always spoke of her. She made the room bigger, he would say. Big enough for someone like me. And every time he told it, he felt that quiet responsibility return. To notice, to pause, to stay. Because the story didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to anyone who chose to carry it forward. One evening, someone listening asked a question Daniel hadn't heard before, and it made him stop mid-sentence. The question lingered in the air longer than Daniel expected. They were sitting near the end of the room, long after most people had gone. Plates were stacked, lights dimmed. Only a few voices remained, softened by fatigue and familiarity. Was she really like that? The woman asked. Daniel had been mid-sentence when she spoke. He stopped, the words he'd prepared slipping away. He had heard many questions over the years, but not this one. This one wasn't curious in the usual way. It wasn't skeptical. It was careful, almost hopeful. Like what? He asked gently. Like you describe, she said. So present, so human. Or is that just how the story feels now, after everything? Daniel leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long while, He didn't answer immediately. He thought about the way Diana had looked at him, not through him, about how she had knelt without asking permission from the room, about how nothing about that moment felt rehearsed or strategic or safe. He smiled softly. Yes, he said, she really was. The woman studied his face, searching for exaggeration, for nostalgia, polishing the edges. She didn't find it, but she was a princess, the woman said quietly. She had power. Daniel nodded. That's why it mattered. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Power gives you choices, he said. She chose closeness. She chose discomfort. She chose to see. Around them, the room had grown still. Someone nearby paused mid-task, listening without realizing it. She didn't do it to be remembered, Daniel continued. She did it because she noticed something that needed care, and she acted. The woman swallowed. That's rare. Yes, Daniel agreed. And it's contagious. He looked around the room. The tired staff, the uneven smiles, the quiet effort of people doing their best without applause. He saw himself in them, years ago. She taught me that kindness isn't a trait, he said. It's a decision, one you make over and over again. The woman nodded slowly. I think people forget that, she said. Daniel smiled. So do I. Sometimes. He stood, gathering his things, preparing to leave. As he did, he felt that familiar weight settle in. Not heavy, not sad, grounding. Carry it. The woman watched him go, her expression thoughtful. Long after he left, she would repeat his words to someone else. She wouldn't remember every detail of the story, but she would remember the answer. Yes, she really was. And somewhere between belief and action, something quietly shifted. As Daniel stepped into the night, he didn't know that someone else would soon test the truth of that story. Unexpectedly, it happened on an ordinary evening. No ceremony, no audience waiting for meaning. Daniel was closing up when a man lingered near the door, coat still on, keys in hand. He had listened quietly earlier, said nothing, watched more than he spoke. As Daniel wiped the last table, the man finally cleared his throat. Can I ask you something? He said. Daniel nodded. Of course. The man hesitated, then said, why does that story still affect you so much? Daniel leaned against the counter, feeling the familiar pause open inside him, the space where truth lived. He had answered this question in many ways before, depending on who asked. But this time, the answer came out simple. Unfiltered. Because, Daniel said, she treated me like I mattered. The man blinked, as if the sentence had caught him off guard. That's it? He asked. Daniel smiled faintly. That's everything. He looked down at his hands, older now, steadier, marked by years of work. People remember titles, he continued. They remember power, but when you're standing there humiliated, trying not to disappear, none of that reaches you. He looked up. What reaches you is being seen. The man nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. She didn't ask who I was, Daniel said. She didn't ask what I could offer. She didn't fix anything. She just chose to kneel. And in that moment, the world felt different. Quiet filled the room. Not awkward, not heavy. Honest. The man exhaled. I think I needed to hear that, he admitted. Daniel tilted his head. Then take it with you. The man smiled, thanked him, and left. Daniel locked the door behind him and stood alone for a moment. The hum of the building settled around him. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Busy, indifferent, alive. He thought about how easily moments passed unnoticed. How often people waited for permission to be kind. How many chances slipped by because no one wanted to disrupt the room. Diana had disrupted it. Not with noise, not with force, but with presence. Daniel gathered his bag and turned off the lights. As he stepped into the night, he felt the story settle where it always did. Not behind him, not above him, with him, because kindness, he had learned, didn't end when the moment passed. It traveled, it changed hands, it asked to be used, and every time Daniel chose to slow down, to listen, to stay, he felt that quiet echo again. Carry it. He walked on, knowing he always would. What Daniel never expected was how far that single moment would travel, long after both the knight and the princess were gone. Has anyone ever made you feel like you truly mattered in a moment when you felt invisible? The room always felt different after the story was told. Not dramatic, not heavy, just quieter, like something important had been placed gently in the middle of it, and everyone instinctively stepped back to give it space. Daniel noticed it every time. People spoke more softly. They listened longer. Even the small, impatient habits of the world seemed to pause, if only briefly. It never lasted forever, but it lasted long enough to matter. That was how Diana's presence worked now. Not as a memory that demanded attention, but as one that changed the temperature of a room. Daniel had seen it in places far removed from ballrooms and charity dinners, in break rooms where someone chose not to mock a mistake, in crowded buses where a seat was quietly offered, in kitchens where voices lowered instead of sharpened. No one mentioned her name in those moments. They didn't need to. Daniel often thought about how easily that night could have gone another way, how close it had come to becoming just another small humiliation, another forgotten wound. All it had taken was one person choosing speed over care. But Diana had chosen pause. She had chosen to kneel. And in doing so, she had shown him something the world rarely teaches: that dignity is not fragile unless we treat it that way. On evenings when Daniel walked home alone, he sometimes replayed the night in his mind, not out of longing, but out of grounding. He remembered the gold light, the broken glass, the sound of silence breaking open. Most of all, he remembered how ordinary it had felt once the moment passed. That was the truth people misunderstood about kindness like hers. It wasn't grand while it was happening. It didn't announce itself. It simply fit like it had always belonged there. Daniel smiled at that thought as he unlocked his door, set his keys down, and moved through the quiet familiarity of his home. Life had not become easier. Loss had not vanished. Power still pressed where it always had. But he no longer mistook that pressure for truth. Somewhere along the way, Diana's presence had moved beyond her. It lived now in the choices people made when no one rewarded them. When no one clapped, when no one filmed, that was where she remained most alive. Not as a figure of tragedy, not as an icon, but as a reminder. Daniel turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the dark, breathing evenly. Tomorrow would come with its own demands, its own small tests. He knew he would meet them the same way he always did, by noticing, by staying, by kneeling, if needed. Because the quiet after kindness is never empty. It's full of possibility. And as the story widened beyond Daniel, one final question remained. What would the world do with it next? There are stories that end loudly. They close with applause, with certainty, with the comfort of resolution. This one never did. It lingered instead, quietly, gently, like a hand resting on your shoulder, long after the moment had passed. Daniel understood that now. Years had moved through him the way years always do, leaving marks both visible and hidden. He had changed jobs, changed addresses, lost people, found others. Life had unfolded without asking permission, just as it always does. But one thing had remained steady, a way of seeing. Whenever someone stood uncertain before him, hands shaking, voice too careful, eyes searching for safety, Daniel felt the echo of that night return, not as memory alone, but as instinct. Pause, notice, stay. Princess Diana was no longer part of the world in the way she once had been. That truth had settled into history, into photographs, into carefully chosen words spoken on anniversaries. But Daniel had learned something history rarely captures. Presence outlives proximity. He saw it in the smallest places, in the way someone slowed down instead of snapping, in how mistakes were met with patience instead of punishment, in moments where dignity was protected simply because someone decided it mattered. That was her real inheritance. Not jewels, not titles, not even legacy as the world usually defines it. Just a choice repeated. Daniel never claimed the story as his own. When he spoke of it, he spoke of her. And when he stayed silent, he let the story speak through his actions instead. That felt right. One evening, long after the restaurant had closed, Daniel stood outside beneath a quiet sky. The city hummed softly around him. Somewhere, laughter drifted through an open window. Somewhere else, someone cried unseen. He knew he could not change everything, but he could change something. That was what she had shown him. Not through instruction, not through command, but through example. She had knelt, not because it was expected, but because it was needed. Daniel smiled to himself. Kindness like that does not demand belief. It asks for participation. If you carry it, it grows. If you ignore it, it waits. That is why the moment never truly ended. It simply moved out of a ballroom, into a life, into countless others touched quietly along the way. And somewhere in that movement, Princess Diana remained exactly who she had always been. Human, present, unafraid to kneel. If you listen closely, you can still hear it, not her voice, but her choice. Moving softly through the world, asking the same simple question again and again. Who needs to be seen right now? And what will you do when you notice them? If this story stayed with you, carry it forward. Notice someone today. Stay a moment longer than required. That's how her kindness still lives.